All right, welcome to the Monday night edition of the People Show on intellectualradio.com, iHeartRadio, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. I am glad to be with you here on another fabulous Monday evening. Well, it's going to be storming up, but it's still a great evening. Hope you all had a great weekend. We've got a great program for you. And I know that you saw the promos of the program coming up. We're going to be talking about responsibility versus resistance on the question of who is it that shapes political outcomes. I think it's a very important conversation that we are going to have. And then we're going to be talking about tax increment financing. Coming up a little bit later on in the program, we're going to be talking with a gentleman who has been working on this for the longest, my friend and colleague who I've hadn't spoken to in quite some time is going to be on the program. Tom Tressler is going to be with me a little bit later on in the program. And so you should certainly want to stick around for that because you want to know more about what's happening on the TIFs, as we call them here in Chicago, and who's getting the tips and how they are harming us as a city, and certainly how they are harming people who are the people who keep things going. That means you and working people, retirees. Then I want to talk to you a little bit about Walgreens is closing yet another one of its stores. And that's going to be part of the TIF conversation because the TIF is over. So the gravy train is over. So that they're deciding that since they are not going to be continuing that they can close the doors. And there was a press conference that was held outside of Walgreens on 86 and Cottage Grove. A few of the alderpersons were there. And I thought it was sort of what I call a knee-jerk reaction. And it seems to be part of the problem is that our so-called representatives grandstand doing some press conferences that may be pointless. But one thing that stood out to me, now this Walgreens that is shutting down on 86 and Cottage Grove, while it sits in the 6th Ward, it is directly across the street from the 8th Ward aldermanic office, which Michelle Harris is the alderwoman of that ward. And Michelle Harris happened to not be at that press conference. Well, wonder why. I have a little bit of a thought that why she wasn't at that press conference. Largely why she wasn't at that press conference is because Michelle Harris is owned by the corporate lobbyist. And this is a problem that we have here locally in the city and what we have actually around the country. So while we have people who look like us, more people who look like us that are in public office here in Chicago, Cook County, and the state of Illinois over the past 40 years, that has not reciprocated to equalizing the investments and equalizing the resources that we disproportionately pay into, that we disproportionately do not receive benefits for. And we have people who look like us that are in these offices. We have some who are progressive, and we have some who are machine corporate lobbyist-owned Democrats. What does that mean? Progressive means just that. Progress for all. That's what progressive means. Progress for all. Doesn't mean that a preferential few gets the largest and the rest of us get to fight over little crumbs that will do no good for any of our communities. That's what progressive means. I know that there's some silly people online talking about progressive policies are causing us to have some of the negative indices that we do. I don't even pay a lot of attention to them. I don't even respond to them because they are basically ignorantly postured, and they don't have any substance. So there's really no use for me wasting any time talking about that. But I'm going to be talking about how it is that we can give these corporations TIF dollars, which means we subsidize their taxes for 10, 15, 20 years in order for them to bring their businesses. And they bring their businesses. And in terms of bringing their businesses, they also supply people with good paying career jobs. That is what the hope is. And that is what the premise of it was on those cases. But TIFs really were started under Harold Washington. And TIFs was supposed to be about blighted areas and blighted communities and putting investments and attracting investments to go in blighted communities, to lift these communities and to give these communities the kinds of support that they need so that we could have a healthy, enriched community. But the TIFs have been bastardized ever since the Harold Washington administration. The TIFs have been bastardized and used for everything other than what the TIFs were created for. And they have become somewhat of a scourge on our communities because they are not being used for the intended purposes of improving areas that were blighted areas. Now, they have something that is called tax credits, or they have some types of subsidies. And when they give those tax credits or when they give those subsidies, if you buy a home and you get a down payment assistance, whether it's 10,000, 15, 20,000, whatever the number is, you get a down payment assistance to help you to afford that home, because that strengthens everybody. It strengthens you as a person who is now able to buy a home, to afford a home for your family, and to build wealth by building equity in that family and paying it off over a period of 10, 15, or 20 or 30 years. You get a down payment assistance, or you may get a grant of 10 or 15 or $20,000. In some cases, they've given grants as much as $75,000. However, what that grant says is that you get this grant and you have to live in this home and maintain this home for a certain period of time. You can't get the grant and then decide that you're only going to stay there for 6 months or a year or 2 years and then sell the home. Well, if you do that, you can sell it, but then you would be required to pay that grant back. And over a period of time, whether it's 7 years, whether it's 8 years or 9 years, over that period of time, that grant dissipates. And if you stay in the home for that full allotted time, because the idea is to build long-term home ownership, if you stay in that home for that period of time, then the grant is forgiven and you have that much more equity in your home. So it is giving you a good running start to building wealth for your family, building equity, so that you will be able to one day retire and or send your children to school, send your kids to college, whatever, building some wealth for the future. That's the way that those grants were. Well, they never had any kind of stipulation for the TIFs that you get these TIFs and you're going to get these TIFs for a certain period of time. But in order for you not to be liable for repaying those TIFs, if you leave after those TIFs have expired, if you leave within 15 years of getting those TIFs, you have to repay the city for those TIFs. Those kind of conditions should have been put on there, but they put no kind of criteria on them. They are just TIFs that people can take advantage of, and typically wealthy people take advantage of these TIFs that already are doing well. And in some cases, it works when you're trying to improve the economic strength of your communities and make sure that you have available resources that are convenient for the people who live in those neighborhoods. So those are some trade-offs that work. Well, trade-offs that don't work are like the ones that we're doing out on the U.S. Steel site. 600 acres of land out there where there used to be thousands of jobs. U.S. Steel employed thousands of Black people on the south side of Chicago that had careers there. They paid for homes, bought cars, took their family on vacation, sent their children to college, paid taxes, and supported Black businesses that were in the area on the south side, all up and down 87th Street, up and down 79th Street, up and down 75th Street, and on and on. When U.S. Steel decided to close up that location, there was never a plan put in place to replace the industry that was outgoing so that thousands of jobs would be available to the people who live in close proximity to the area. At one time in the city of Chicago, it only took you 10 to 15 minutes, on average 20 minutes to get to work because there was so much industry that was available here in Chicago. But now they're building, or they're proposing, this data center, which is the CompuLab on the old U.S. Steel site, that is only going to bring about 150 jobs. 150 jobs at the cost of $500 million between the city, the county, and the state. $500 million subsidy, 150 jobs. Those 150 jobs are not going to be held by people who live within proximity of the data center. Those people are going to be largely people who are imported in, which is not a good use of our tax dollars. On the other hand, the 2019 infrastructure that put $165 million to build the infrastructure for the roads and the interchange out in the south suburb, that the FAA has told us that we need to build a third airport. 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago, this study was done by the FAA and said that at a certain point, we are going to reach capacity, a major metropolitan region as we are here in the Midwest, that we need a third airport. Every other major metropolitan region has multiple airports. We're the only major metropolitan hub that does not have a third airport. And we've had people within the system that have been objectors and have been opponents of that type of investment that doesn't make any sense, playing to their corporatist partners. J.B. Pritzker, who has not been a large voice in advocacy for the South Suburban Airport. In fact, he had commissioned another study because he wanted to find another use for the space. Well, they did the study, and the study came back and said that the best use for that land is for that airport. That would be the best use for the land. So his own study that he commissioned came back and said that that would be the best recommendation for that land. Now we have 11 new new mayors out in the south suburbs, and there was a presentation done to those new mayors as well as those who were the old mayors that were out there. And they've done in my opinion, very little to push and forge this idea together. I believe that if there was more collective force by the elected bodies joined together, that we could be a lot further on. However, dealing with apples, $500 million to bring 150 jobs, $500 million to build the airport would bring 15,000 jobs. The first phase would be about 6,000 jobs, upwards to 15,000 jobs. Airports are the greatest stimulation for economic growth in major metropolitan. Why? Because businesses want to be close by airports. They want to have a close hub where they can get their goods in and out and into their end destination in a relatively quick period of time. So that's basically what it is. Ross Perot's son built an airport out in Houston, and there were lots of pushback for him doing that, but he did that, built it with their own money and their own investors, and now you have Fortune 400 companies that are itching, trying to get in and around the airport, and it has created thousands upon thousands of jobs. That would be a better use of our tax dollars, tax investment. It would create thousands of careers, not just jobs, but thousands of careers that people will be able to start, work, and retire from, with good pensions and good retirements, being able to continue to expand the tax base. That's what we're going to be talking about and dealing with in the next hour with my guest, Tom Tresser. Now, I want to talk about responsibility versus resistance. Responsibility versus resistance. Who shapes political outcomes? By the way, if you'd like to call me, you can at 951-221-8221. If you'd like to chime in, 951-221-8221. So I've been very critical of people like Snoop-Dogg, Ice Cube, Stephen A. Smith, Dr. Cornell West. I've been very critical of them because of what we are living now. In some of the political ignorance, in some cases, political ignorance, in other cases, it is misguided resistance. I want to start with Dr. Cornell West, someone who is a scholar, someone who knows, and someone who understands what's going on. Now, I wrote, there's conversation that keeps coming up in political spaces, and it's one that people often feel very strong about. But we don't slow down enough to unpack what it is in these conversations. It is this idea of responsibility, specifically the responsibility of public, intellectual, and cultural figures in shaping political outcomes. From the perspective of a lot of people can relate to, even when we don't say it out loud. Meaning that if you have a large platform, if millions of people are listening to you, then what you say doesn't just live in the abstract. they really have serious consequences. And they have serious consequences, in particular, when you have circumstances like we have been faced with over the past 10 years. You take Dr. Cornell West, who has been a consistent voice in many respects for justice, and for equity, and for challenging the systems of power. This can't be denied. But at the same time, he's also been deeply critical of the Democratic Party. And at certain points, he's chosen to operate outside of it completely, rather than going to the party and going to those who are representative leaders of the party and having a conversation about those areas of justice, those areas, of equity, to challenge the system, to have a more focused, strategic message to address these areas. So, but this is a lot of the area where the tension begins. On one hand, there's the ideology of the being principled argument being made. If the system is flawed, then fundamentally flawed, then working within it might not be enough. You may need to challenge it from the outside and apply pressure. Well, that is very true. And you can do that without blowing the system up. And you can do that without necessarily putting us at risk or working on behalf of the opposition. Because I contend that that is what we must do, is we must infiltrate the party. We must infiltrate the family. So the argument that I make is that on the pragmatic argument, that it sounds a lot like my car analogy. You have a car. You bought a car a year, 2, 3 years ago, even 4 years ago. You bought this car. Brand new car. The longer you drive it, the more frequently you drive it, it's going to have a certain amount of wear and tear on it. And some of the parts are going to wear out faster for any number of reasons on the car. And 1 or 2 of those parts, when they go out, will make the car run sluggish. Now, mind you, you just bought this car. In 3 years, 4 years, it's not a long time. Do you blow up the car because you've had some mechanical issues? Or do you take the car so that the car can be repaired and the broken parts can be replaced, so that while the parts are being replaced, you're still engaged? And so you're working to get the car repaired, so you get the car back so that the entire car runs better. You don't just get rid of it. You don't blow it up because it was having some challenges. What you do is you fix the parts of the car that cause the entire car to run rough. And you get those parts fixed or even replaced. And by the same analogy, the Republican Party is a completely dismantled, destroyed, non-existence of a party that you could have the same set of facts and the same fundamental protections and beliefs, that you could have serious debate on addressing really complicated issues. And in my view, some of these issues are not complicated. It's not complicated that people should have a right to a good education. That's not complicated. It's not complicated that people should have a right to have access to health care, comprehensive health care. That is not complicated. What it is one group of people who decide that you shouldn't have a right to a good education, and you shouldn't have a right to health care. You should pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Well, that's very easy for somebody to say who has multiple boots, and the very people that they're talking to don't have a boot. And if they do have a boot, they might be strapless or worn. So it's very easy and very for somebody to be that cavalier talking about that. So that's why I say these things are not complicated. There may be some other things that are complicated, but some basic fundamentals, they're really not complicated. If people really want to fix problems, they want to address issues, or is it that they just want to win? That's the greater problem. So, but for a lot of people, the frustration comes that the feeling is that stepping outside of the system, especially during high stakes elections like we had in November, can seriously contribute to fragmentation. And in terms of what we just had in very contested races, those fragments really matter. Now, you take the last presidential election. Now, only someone who is acutely misguided and acutely politically ignorant would support and did support what we have in place now as the most powerful person in the world, in the most powerful seat in the world, that is the most incompetent, spiteful, vile, despicable representation of humanity. That's the reality of what is. Anybody who is supporting that is acutely misguided and terribly, terribly uninformed. And it can't just be out of bitterness, because none of us who are married. None of us who have family, all of us come from a family. And none of us had it to where it was perfect, that we got along and agreed with every one of our siblings, that we agreed with everything that our mother and father said and had us doing. None of us lived in that utopia. But none of us wanted to blow up our family. I might not agree, nor they may agree with me, but you don't blow up the entire system. What you do is you get in and you have the kinds of collaborative conversations that you need to address whatever those differences are, so that you can work those differences out while maintaining the family, keeping the family together, not allowing for the outside influences to disrupt the family. Now, let me be very, very clear about something, because this is where the conversation goes completely off the rail. When we start talking about a single individual, a single intellectual, or a single celebrity, these people individually do not control the outcomes of elections. They don't control the outcomes of national elections, not individually. It just isn't how the system works. When you're talking about millions of voters, multiple institutions, economic conditions, campaign strategies, all of this that are colliding with each other. However, they don't control the outcomes, but they do have influence. And with influence comes responsibility. When you have these large platforms, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility for, one, being learned yourself about understanding this process and understanding how these things mechanically work, and who and what system is best working for the common good of the people. Everybody has a record. Everybody has a record. Every party has a record. Both of the major parties have a record. And the Republican Party of today, of the past 80 years, that Republican Party is not the Republican Party that was prior to Jim Crow and prior to Reconstruction. That's not the same Republican Party of the day. I know that some of you all like to say, well, we voted Republican before. Not these Republicans. That's kind of conflating the two. So when someone has this large platform and it's consistently telling people that both parties are failing, or that the system itself isn't working, or it is not responding to issues that are important to our communities, if you beat that drum long enough and loud enough, it can augment or it could shape the way people engage or not engage with the political process. So it isn't just about intellectuals. It extends to the cultural figures. Like I said before, people like Ice Cube, Snoop-Dogg, who at varying times stepped into the political conversation. Now, these people are not policy experts by any way, shape, or form. They are not. I've listened to them, and they may be able to take a position. But in a lot of respect, they've taken a position to not take a position. Now, the idea, and this tells me about intelligence and political awareness, intelligence and political astuteness. They are not synonymous. They are not the same. Intelligence, meaning the ability to acquire information and apply it, and political astuteness of understanding the science of how politics works to get to a certain goal, to answer and to establish resources and to govern for the common good. Two very different things. And because somebody has a large platform, because they may be a cultural figure or they may be an entertainer, because they can reach millions of people, does not mean that that person, that individual, or those persons have their pulse on understanding how governance works or not. And for those people who have such a platform, you have a great responsibility to do no harm. To do no harm. I can't say that about Snoop Dogg. I can't say that about Ice Cube. I certainly can't say that about Stephen A. Smith. And I certainly can't say it about Dr. Cornell West. Because the fact of the matter is, they played a role with their influence. Understanding your influence carries significant weight. The strategy and the principle don't always align. And we have witnessed in this last cycle, I certainly have come to a greater understanding that intelligence and political astuteness are not one and the same. They are not synonymous. Because a person may be extraordinarily bright and intelligent does not mean that they are extraordinarily politically astute or prepared. There are people who are very intelligent, but they are completely ignorant when it comes to discussing certain things, like the Bible, like the scriptures. I have watched on more times than I can count bright people, intelligent people, who then try, who has never studied, who really doesn't have a faith commitment, and are trying to intellectualize the scriptures. I am reminded of how ignorant they are of that document, of the book of scriptures, because while they are trying to debate and discuss on an intellectual level, lets us know you cannot intellectualize God. You cannot intellectualize the scriptures. And at the same time, say that you don't have a belief. But the point is, I'm not here to debate that. The point is that I can know a lot about a certain subject, be very, very astute and capable of that certain subject. But there are things that I am completely ignorant of. And ignorant only means one thing, that you don't know. That's what ignorant means, that you don't know. And all of us are ignorant somewhere. Not a adjective where it's a bad name or it's calling you out of your name. It just simply means you don't know. Now, but Cornell West, who understood politically, but may have been blinded by his own ego or whatever other frustration, maybe he had a conversation with the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party decided to shun him because, he had been so downright critical of Barack Obama, he and Tavis Smiley, that every time you turned around that they were criticizing Barack Obama, I guess trying to show that, that they could be, or that they were not going to be some go along to get along just because, this was the black president, so that they had to make this profoundly clear to people that they were going to be able to criticize the president. And I think that to agree that some of that is very healthy. I think that that's very healthy. My mentor, Harold Washington, said that you should always critically ask questions of your government, of your representative. You should always ask questions. So I am not suggesting that they should not have been questioning, asking for more clarity. Again, these are two people who had and have large platforms. And to a certain degree, those persons are fairly politically astute. They're certainly two intelligent men. In some respects, extraordinarily misguided. So your ego can supersede your intelligence and make you look like the biggest fool ever walked. That's what your ego can do. When you are the only person that you have as your advisor, and if you are the only person that you have as an advisor, then you've got a fool for an advisor. That's what ego does. Ego dismisses anybody else's thoughts, suggestions, or ideas. While you might sit there and pretend like you're paying attention, you're just really waiting for them to shut up so that you can move on or you can say what it is that you want to say without even hearing from somebody else. That means your ego has got you somehow thinking that you don't need to have an objective counsel or a view or a different perspective from somebody else outside of yourself. Ego would do that. And I contend that people like Cornell West, and I really believe, because knowing Cornell West and what his consistency has been up until these recent 15 years, that he operates as though someone who was operating as though they're entitled. But then he's also been operating as though he is operating from a position of what is right and righteous. And I don't see that at all. And it is unfortunate that we have not held him accountable, because I believe in the person that we have as a president of the United States that is inflicting the kind of reversal in terms of policies that people who came before you and I have committed, sacrificed, and in some cases died for. Us to have a more participatory role in place that is now being undermined and unraveled, largely because of irresponsible, negligent, egotistical conduct by people like Cornell West. I am simply saying to you and I, whoever it is that is paying attention, that we cannot be as so arrogant that when you don't know, and just because you have some strength of intellectual ability in a certain area and you do not understand. Now, I'm not talking about, the stuff on the surface of opinionating about the current president, but I'm talking about real substantive policy and the differences between the two parties. I am a Democrat. I am a progressive Democrat. I am not someone who believes in the I got mine, you get yours philosophy. That's what capitalists are. I believe that if one wants to do well, you can do well, but we should not be leaving anybody behind. That is inhumane. So, but Cornell West could have gone to the powers that be because he certainly has access, or can certainly get access, and could have gone to the Democratic Party and said, look, I'd like to have a conversation. because there are some areas and some issues that I don't hear being messaged by the Democrats. And I contend that we need to discuss them. And I would like to be on the campaign challenging the Democratic Party to address these issues as a part of their objectives and their agenda. That is how you deal with not blowing the system up by getting into the system and infiltrating the system to get that system to respond in a way that you see that they're not responding. And Dr. earned PhD, Cornell West, unlike some of these 50 cents preachers going around calling themselves doctor, a man who earned his PhD, who was obviously extraordinarily bright, but terribly misguided. And I believe he, Snoop-Dogg, Ice Cube, and others contributed to what we are facing with, because elections have consequences. They have serious consequences. Just like any other choice that you make in your life. Every decision that you make has consequences, good or bad. They have consequences. And when you do not think and think clearly before making a decision, in most cases, you will make the wrong choice. And you will go with that choice very arrogantly until you realize that you oops, because the consequences of that decision you cannot escape. That's where the problem is with this being responsibility versus resistance. Responsibility versus resistance. They certainly have their place. Resistance has its place. I contend this as a registered Democrat to the Democratic Party, because I believe that our party is the party that is actually making some headway. But our party, the Democratic Party, as it relates to the Black community, are going to have to demonstrate if the Black community is going to support the Democratic Party as it ought to at the levels, then the Democratic Party has to be responsible, has to be responsive. The Democratic Party has to be responsive. All across the country, in the regions, especially now in the regional elections where state legislatures and mayors and municipality elections are going on. And Democrats are doing well. Democrats are doing really well. However, do not become disconnected and unfocused, or taking your constituents for granted. The 1965 Voting Rights Act has been all but gutted. And what's remaining of it has little to no sting. But what we have to do is, in our fighting back, because as Reverend Jackson has always said to us, is that when we fight, we win. We've never lost a battle when we fought, and we've never won a battle when we didn't fight. We have to stand in and fight. How do we do this? Is that we have to approach every state legislature, because it's the state legislatures that draw these districts and draw these maps. So we have to win in every one of these legislative bodies, especially those in the South. School boards, state legislators, legislative positions, municipality. Those are the areas that we have got to be extraordinarily engaging in. Now, we are winning many of those. We lost 264 of them. There's been 280. And we are winning largely. We are winning largely, and we need to, because that is how we will push back on what this bigoted, racist, Supreme Court majority of the conservative wings did. Now, I'm not talking about, when I talk about races, I'm not talking about Clarence Thomas. He's something else. He's something else. But I'm not talking about him when I mention racist or racism. He's there's a whole nother name that I have from him, and it is not Uncle Tom. It is not Uncle Tom. I need for you to go read the Uncle Tom's Cabin story. You will see that Clarence Thomas does not represent Uncle Tom. He represents something else far more sinister and far worse than Uncle Tom. He couldn't walk on the same carpet as Uncle Tom. He could not do that. He absolutely could not do it. So, what we have to do is we have to be more strategic. We have to talk with each other even more, so that we understand that our plight that we are responsible for it. And what we are living now is a real testament of why we cannot make these kinds of mistakes and ignore the real facts. We cannot ignore the real facts going forward any longer. We have to continue these kind of conversations. I'm going to be switching gears here in just a minute, but I needed to talk about that, because I think that is something that we have to really seriously think about. We have to think about those people who have influence and how they influence outcomes. and how they influence people to either engage or disengage. And in this case, I believe there was an influence that caused people to disengage at a level that we ended up where we are now. We'll overcome it, we'll resist it, and over time, we will win. So let's keep that in mind. All right, we're going to switch gears here. I told you earlier on that we were going to talk about something. We're going to talk about these tips. My friend Tom Tressa, who has been on this case for many, many years, helping us to understand. He wrote the book, Chicago is Not Broke, and he talks about TIFs and the disadvantages of them and how they have hurt our system, and to even go further, how now we have these billionaires that are infiltrating our governing bodies and taking our governing bodies so that they can just hoard more money and make themselves and their cronies richer while they are just pilfering the coffers of the common good. And so his name is Tom Tressa, and he is here with me now. Tom, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for bringing me on the show.
Thank you for being here. It's been a long time since you and I have had a conversation, so I want to delve right into to it. You and I had a little brief conversation earlier about the whole billionaire strategy, but I want to talk to you about the TIFs. So today there was a press conference on the south side of Chicago where Walgreens made an announcement that they're closing a location, a much needed location for a community where we have a large number of seniors who need to be able to get to their medications and get their prescriptions and all that sort of stuff. And now that the TIFs have expired, ding, 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 Walgreens conveniently are saying so long.
Right. Yes.
Talk to us about the TIFs.
Right. So I think in your introductory remarks, you used the word cronies and pilfering. So a tax increment financing district, or a TIF, is used extensively in the city of Chicago. We have 121 of those districts, but they're all across the state of Illinois. We have over 450 of them, and they're in 49 states. And what they're supposed to do is incent development. And when I say development, it's usually meant the building of a thing, some project, a shopping mall, a housing project, something like that, that's supposed to generate revenue, property tax in a so-called blighted area. So we got to pause just for a second and contemplate the word blight, because I think it's a racist and a loaded term, and you have to ask who blighted who. You know what I mean? Folks didn't blight themselves. So were you talking about in Chatham, or where that Walgreens is closed? The people down there didn't mess up their own communities. It got messed up for them over decades by the white power structure that denied them resources, denied them schools, denied them equitable treatment in all manner of things, city services, on and on and on. This is an old story, Mark, to your listeners and viewers, I'm quite sure. But yet, nevertheless, that's the context that you cannot escape when you start to talk about TIFs. You just don't jump right in there and say, "Oh yeah, they're making jobs, I'm happy." No. You gotta give it a little context. That being said, TIFs took off the table last year. Last year we counted $1.3 billion. So that's how much property taxes were sucked away from their public service by TIFs. And what happens to this money? They go into little piggy banks, little slush funds that get doled out. And whether that Walgreens or stores like it got TIF money, I'd have to look into it, but it's pretty typical that to bring a Walgreens or to bring maybe a Walmart or something like that. Certainly at Borders Books was given money in the day, and now they're gone. It's very common. Our Target, for example, has gotten TIF money. And then business changes, or they sell the property, or it's a loss and they walk away. So that is not helping the community. Okay, that is not helping the community. These real estate deals that we talk about have nothing to do with the lives of the people. The people who are in that protest today, who want health care, they want a clinic, you know what I mean? They want a job, they want something for their kids. These TIFs will take that away from them. They will not help them at all. I've been saying this for 15 years. And the number one loser in this business are our schools. So when $1 of property tax gets missing, it's taken off the table. 56 cents of that dollar was supposed to go to our public schools. And guess who's in our public schools? Mostly young people of color, right? So that's why I say this is a racist thing. And I'm sorry about the people who are protesting the loss of that very meaningful service. Now I have to go maybe an extra 50 minutes or an hour to get my medications, and that's a hardship. That's for real.
Right. So you talked about how, these TIFs. So, and I said, why, first of all, can you kind of go back to the history of where TIFs started here in Chicago? Who started the TIFs? And when you say blight, when I hear the word blight, what I hear is, whenever we talk about that, I talk about divesting, the disinvestment is really what that means, is that, somebody raped the community and let it go spoil so they can buy it cheaply to go and make, some more money on it, like we have being done. So talk about the history of TIFs, where it came from, who started it, and you already talked about what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, so they started in California in the 50s. It was brought here by, of all people, Harold Washington in 1984 to deal with a part of the city down in the Central Loop. There's a thing called Block 37. I think it used to be, maybe it was the Sutherland Hotel. It was a very large property, and they tore it down, and they couldn't figure out what to do with it. And Mayor Washington was aware of how, under Mayor Daley, the first, Richard J. Daley, most development was concentrating on the Loop, the Central Business District. There's something called the Central Area Plan, and Daley was a big builder. The Sears Tower and so many other things. But Mayor Washington said, "Well, can we get some love into the neighborhoods?" And he thought that a TIF district would do it. And sadly, he didn't live long enough to see how that would work out, and it really did not work out according to what it was in his heart. It was the opposite. The TIF program was seized upon by Mayor Richard M. Daley, the second Daley, as soon as he got into office, which is in 1989. So remember, Harold dies, we have an interim mayor, right? And now Daley, the second, comes into power, where he stayed for like 20, 22, 23 years. Someone in his shop realized that this thing is the goose that lays the golden egg. And so you started to see TIF money pouring into the Central Loop. The Central Loop TIF was created very early on and lasted until it was canceled by Daley. It was so controversial. And I've tracked $850 million of TIF money invested just in the Loop. In other words, skyscrapers, PepsiCo's headquarters, in the West Loop. I have a spreadsheet with 45 projects on it, but it's just the Loop. So that's $840 million. And these are properties owned by Tishman Speyer, S.P. Friedman. I mean, these are not neighborhood, projects. These are billionaire projects. And many of these things get flipped. So if you give a TIF to a developer and he builds, a 30-story tower or what have you, right? And it costs $100 million and we gave him $20 million. He sells it for $200 million. He keeps the profit plus the TIF money we gave him. So we're acting as a banker in all this. This has been going on for now 40 years or more. The latest outrage, and so again, this sounds like ancient history. It sounds like, what does it have to do with me? I'm living in Pilsen, I'm living in Chatham, I'm living in Englewood. It has everything to do with you, because just September of last year, under the Johnson administration, they announced the Central Area 2045 plan. So this is the plan that will guide our Central Core District, for the next 20 years. And what's at the heart of it? 6 giant office towers that are half empty because they were overbuilt. COVID came, people's work habits changed. So these office towers are now white elephants. So we're going to give these 6 white male billionaires $640 million to convert those 6 towers into high-end residential. That's the latest outrage. Meanwhile, people are still sucking on lead from their lead pipes, and their water supply is still hurting our people, our children. The South Side homes, are flooding, right? Many schools don't have librarians or nurses, in our public schools. So that stuff hasn't changed, but we're going to give these 6 guys $640 million to turn their half-empty buildings into high-end residential. It's not our problem, Mark. You know what I mean? It's not our problem that they're having a bad year. I mean, they made their bones for years, running those office towers. Times change. That's capitalism, my friend. You take your loss, you sell your building for whatever, and somebody buys it for a song, and then they do something with it. No, it's horrible. In fact, everybody who's watching this show and is listening to the show, you need to call Mayor Johnson and tell him to stop this nonsense. And we haven't even talked about the Bear Stadium yet.
Well, now let's kind of unpack that a little bit further. So you said something about capitalism, right? We have all these capitalists. The first thing they want to say, well, we're a capitalistic society, and every man for himself. I've got mine, you get yours, kind of thing, right? When it's all going well for the capitalists. Mm-hmm. But then when the capitalists are starting to lose, they want to go to the government, and the billionaires, they think that they should get hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies because poor them, they're losing on these projects.
I know, right?
Right?
Well, it's capitalism for you and me, man. If Mark and Tom start a pizzeria and it goes bust, we're done. We're out. That's my mortgage, right? We thought we had a good pizzeria, but no one liked our pizza, man. But it's socialism for those guys. They get
yes, right. Reverse capitalism.
Yeah.
So the same people who speak so vehemently against socialism are looking for somebody to undergird them.
Absolutely.
For us to undergird them.
And that's why I hate TIFs. It's not competitive. I mean, so if you're a true capitalist and you're like, look, I take a risk, I buy a building, I start a business, I hire people, I put a product out there, people like my product, they buy it, I make a profit, I pay my employees, I pay my taxes. That's how it's supposed to be. But if your project goes south and it's a bust, that's also part of the game. It's creative destruction. So maybe we learned something. Mark and Tom, their pizza recipe was not great, but our second restaurant, we learn, and so the second restaurant, that's how it's supposed to be, right? But if the city buys our competitor's pizza oven across the street, right, and they give him a free pizza oven, me and you, we're at a disadvantage. We can't compete with the guy who got the free oven, and that's so you can be a liberal or you can be conservative. Either way, you have to hate TIFs. You just can't. You can't love them. They're no good.
Yeah. Well, there's a twinge. I don't even know if I can call it a twinge, but there certainly has elements of slavery in what these TIFs are, right? So it's saying that the guy who was the capitalist, raised all this money, built these buildings, and made millions and millions of dollars off these buildings, right? They made, they flipped them 2 or 3 times, or 4 or 5 times, or however many times that they've been flipped. And now they want to come back and say, give me $640 million for these 6 projects. I think that's what you said, $640 million for these 6 projects that I've already made, I don't know, a couple of $1 billion on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do in my analysis place TIFs in the direct lineage from chattel slavery to Jim Crow to, as you say, disinvestment in the Black communities, to contract house buying. That was a particular scam that we had here in the Black community in the 60s and 70s, where Black folks paid billions of dollars more than they should have in order to get their own homes, up until the present day when 50 schools were closed, mostly in the Black communities. Over policing is also part of all this. And so now the latest wrinkle, I guess you could say, in this centuries old economic war against people of color in America is TIFs. That's what I call it. I'm pretty blunt, and I'm willing to defend that in any form in front of anybody who thinks I'm overreacting. But I say TIFs are racist and they cannot be reformed, and they should be abolished. And let's think about some other way to do economic development in our cities, in our communities. And I would just have to say, stop doing deals. It has nothing to do with the people's well-being. Think about the human development of our people. That's the measure that I would give to my mayor or to my president or to my governor, to say, ask yourself, what do the people need? Are they smart? Are they happy? Are they healthy? And if they're not, that's where we should put our money and our energies, right? So that means, but that going down that path, you need to hire human beings. You need to hire like teachers. You need to hire, nurses. You need to hire librarians. You need to hire maybe coaches, for programs, after school in the park districts. Those are human beings, tend to belong to unions that oppose, the mayor and the politicians. So they would rather give money for the construction projects, because the construction unions tend to be white dominated and conservative and exclusionary. So I think it's a very political game. Surprise, surprise, how we do development, not just in Chicago, but in America. And in my scenario, you'd be hiring more teachers and more nurses and more librarians, and those tend to be people of color lots of times. So that builds the middle class, right? And then it also bolsters those unions that tend to be kind of militant, and kind of say screw you to the power structure. So that's why you're never going to see that. You're never going to see someone say, all right, my plan is to cut class size in half. That's my plan. You're not going to see I don't think you're going to see a white or Black politician, for all I know, say, because that means we got to hire another 1,000 teachers.
Right. Well, now, what you said this is called the central, what?
It's the Central Area Plan, published by the City of Chicago's Department of Planning and Development in September of last year. So that's the core of our city. And so this is the plan that will guide the heart of the city of Chicago for the next 20 years. And it calls for the redevelopment of these office buildings that are half empty or sometimes 2/3 empty into residences. And believe me, the real estate industry has been doing this, pushing this for the last 4 or 5 years since COVID. They know that they're hurting. They know that they're overbuilt. There's too much office tower. They know that the way people are working in America and across the world has changed. So we don't need as much office space as we thought we did. So this is their way of getting out of a sticky wicket. They're going to have us bail them out. Right?
So they're going to spend another $640 million
on 6 buildings
on the back of homeowners on the south and west sides of Chicago.
All across the city will be paying for this. And other businessmen who are not in the loop, maybe they're in another part of the city, they say, why should they get a break just because they're in the loop? What's so special about that? I'm I've got a half-empty office building in Skokie or in Rockford, or give me some money. Jesus. So now the Bears are fighting tooth and nail to get their billions. They're threatening to leave the city. So here's my thing to anybody who's watching this who's a Bear fan: burn your tickets, set them on fire, and put it on Facebook or something. Send your tickets back to McCaskey. So the McCaskey family, they're billionaires. Okay, Virginia McCaskey is worth $2 billion conservatively.
Mm-hmm.
If the Bears were to sell their franchise tomorrow, they would get $9 billion to sell if they sold the team. And just in revenues alone from tickets and TV, they made $625 million in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And for a family of four to go to the Bears game for just a cheap normal season game, it's $714 for a family of four. Are you kidding me?
$714 for a family of four.
That's right, because it's parking and programs and a hot dog and beer, and of course the price of the tickets.
Right.
So you want to go to Hammond? Don't let the locker door hit you in the butt on the way out. That's what I say.
Yeah. Well, what I say to Mayor Johnson, that if the Bears want to go to Hammond, they want to go to Arlington or wherever it is that they want to go to, tell them that they can go, but they have to leave the name Chicago at Chicago. They can't be the Chicago Bears in Arlington or Hammond.
Yeah. Right. Put the Arlington Heights Bears on your jersey. It's not even going to fit.
Right. Right.
It's just greed. Yeah. It's greed. And so here's the patient fans, the fans who sit in the freezing cold year after year, right? Waiting for a good season, paying all those high prices, watching the games on television, which enriches the sponsors. We're not even talking about the beer guys and the guys who are selling hot dogs. The poor fans, now they get a good season, and the Bears raised their ticket price by 12%, and they're threatening to leave. Are you kidding me? The love is only one way, from the fans to the team. The teams don't give a squat about their fans. It's so obvious.
Well, I was not aware of this $640 million Central Area Plan deal. I have worked with Fritz Kagi since he's been in office, and unfortunately, we have done here locally that I put to the same liking what we did nationally by electing Trump again. We did here by electing Patrick Hines and retaining George Cardenas and electing what's her name? I can't think of the woman's name that we elected or that they elected to oust Samantha Steele. So now the board of the
board of review
is now controlled by Larry Rogers Jr. He has all three people there, and Patrick Hine. So now they've shifted more than $4.5 billion of those same people downtown of their real estate taxes onto homeowners.
Yeah,
that has caused homeowners taxes to go up an average of about $700 in the city of Chicago. That we're subsidizing their taxes.
Right.
Not to mention the commercial owners that have these blighted buildings that are empty on the south and west sides of Chicago that are only paying 10 or 15% of their real estate taxes, and we're paying the rest because they have all these commercial vacancies because of the way that the law is written.
Yeah.
So that has now been put on steroids. So we're going to be paying even more.
Yeah.
And I'm really surprised that Brandon Johnson, who, is considered to be a progressive, meaning progress for all, is acting like a corporatist in this fashion.
So disappointing. I mean, yes, the loss of Fritz Kagi, who was a reformer, is a blow. He tried as best he could to rectify 100 years of mess. The Cook County tax system is a product of the Democratic machine. It's unlike anything in the country, and he wrestled with it, and there was a lot of blowback. I don't think he did a good job in explaining his good accomplishments, but he was a master of explaining how the system was messed up, and he and his crew gave presentations on why are your property taxes so high, and the Board of Review is right up there. So he doesn't control that, or the assessor doesn't control that, but it's like you say, it's part of the story. If I own a hotel and it's assessed at $1 million, that's what I got to pay. I got to pay $1 million in taxes. I hire a lawyer. He goes in front of that body and says, it's only you should only pay $200,000. Oh yes, you're right, Mr. Trusser. You don't have to pay $1 million. You can only pay 200. So that's 800,000. I'm forgiven. The lawyer walks away with like a third of that.
Right.
And then he takes some of that and he gives it to these crooked politicians,
right.
Campaign. So that's been so well documented. The Tribune did series on it. The Chicago Magazine. This is an old story, but it's not that. Even though people are suffering across the region from property tax overload, there's not a movement. We don't see a unified movement of different communities coming together to stop this nonsense. To either freeze the property taxes altogether, to take schools off the property tax rolls, for example, and have them funded by the state, which the Constitution sort of says they should do. Illinois is one of the worst. I think they give like maybe 40% of what a school needs, in terms of its revenue, and it should be much higher. When that happens, the local school districts rely heavily on property taxes to pay, their schools, which is also racist. So your child's education shouldn't depend on your zip code, right? But if you're in a rich community and there's a mall, and there's buildings that houses that are very expensive and therefore throw off a lot of property tax, your schools are going to look like Harvard. You go up to Glenview or saying Deerfield and places like that, and you walk into a high school, you think you're on a college campus, right? But then you go into a black community, it looks like a friggin' Iraq in there, because it's just not fair. It's just not fair. You cannot. There's no equity in that formula. So now, on top of all that, you have what you pointed out. Businesses laying off their taxes on us. So we're getting slammed, man. Oh my goodness. The poor property owners across the state. I've been to rallies and I've spoken at rallies in Austin, Orland Park, Pilsen, and Aurora. That's 4 different parts of our region. Mm-hmm. White, black, Latino, whatever, if affluent, not so affluent, right? But they all have in common is they're rebelling against these practices that we're speaking about here tonight.
Why is it that we why do you think that we cannot change this system?
Well, I've been doing civic work for most of my adult life, and so how smart are people, how educated are, where are they going to learn about all this? I've done maybe 300 public meetings, right? Since 2009, I did meetings about the Olympics. Why the Olympics were a terrible idea. So don't believe Mayor Daley and the other business leaders who think the Olympics are going to, be manna from heaven and shave the city. No, that's the exact opposite. So there's a lot of misinformation and lying out there. So you've got corruption, you've got conflicts of interest, and you have a population, and we're overworked. So, people are working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, you know what I mean? Where do you have the time for the average mom or the average working person to just sit and sort all this through? They don't want you to do that. They don't want you to have time. You know what I mean? It's in their interest to have you work yourself to death. And you can't pick up a newspaper. You can't chat with your neighbors or go to the church, have coffee and discuss these issues, in an intelligent way. They don't want you to do that. So I spent my life running around to communities trying to make people smart about some of this stuff. I call myself a civic educator and public defender, but not like a law public, like, you know, like you would think about the courts. But I think the word public, the very word itself, is under attack in Chicago and America. So I spent a lot of time just explaining to people some of these basics of civic finance. It's your money. I mean, people certainly get that. You know, it was the 250th anniversary of America, right? You know, so we're going to be doing a lot of flag waving, and you're going to see lots of pictures of Washington crossing the Delaware and whatnot. But essentially, it was a tax revolt. You know, so we got to govern ourselves. If you're going to use our money for stuff, we got to be in on the decision-making process. Is what we said back in the day. And I think it's time for another revolution. How about that?
Well, listen, I believe that this is one of a topic that we now have available to us, and I think we should use it. We have this social media outlet that's available to us. We have this platform that's available to us that we can build where, because as you say, people, their lives are busy. They're not able to get to meetings. They're not able to leave their homes to go to meetings, but we can have big, huge meetings like this that is easy for people. All they have to do is log on their computer. I think that we cannot accept not being able to change this system. We cannot accept that. And I am certainly not a person who accepts that we cannot, and that somehow our government is more powerful than we are. I fundamentally don't believe that. And I think that, you know, when we took on the city and sued the city for what I call another tax scam of red light cameras.
Oh, sure.
That we were able to win a lawsuit. Now, the lawsuit was something that, on a bigger picture, pointed out a bigger problem in this entire system. It didn't get rid of the system, but the goal was certainly to point it out that we won a $38 million reversal of funds coming back to motorists and $125 million of fine reductions, right? And made the city implement its ticket noticing the way that it's supposed to, according to the law. But the whole system needs to be done away with. But my point is that there was very few people, other than the people who were part of our committee, that gave us any type of chance. Most people laughed at us and didn't think that it would go anywhere.
Yeah, right.
So I believe that with the enormous amount of knowledge that you have about this and the clarity in which you are able to help us understand it, I really believe that we need to create that kind of movement, because there are enough people out here who, whether they are poor or middle class, if there's any such thing, or upper middle class or wealthy, they're all paying taxes that are unfair and unjust, right? And I think that we can somehow figure out how we can bring enough of those people together that we can apply enough pressure on people who are in these public offices that if they're not willing to do it, then maybe we need to change the machine politicians like we change our underwear. We may have to change them every cycle until we have people who are going to respond to our demands.
Well, you've got an election coming up next year. So here we are in about a year away, just about a year away. We're going to get to the primary or the general election and then the runoff. So if you're listening to this and you have some money and you want to take markup on his word, let's create a campaign Project 26. So we're trying to elect 26 aldermen in the year 2027. And the rallying cry will be, stop the billionaires from stealing our shit. No BSS. Stop the billionaires from stealing our shit, which includes canceling TIFs, fixing this property tax mess, keeping people in their homes, and other reforms that are well known. But they all will have the net effect of putting more money in our pockets and improving our city services. So, I wrote a book about all this, Mark, as you may know. Chicago is not broke.
Yes.
Funding the city we deserve. You can go to Tresser.com, www.tresser.com, and get all the details. This is $5 billion in sustainable revenue solutions that are nothing to do with red light cameras, or as we used to call them, scammers, or driving while black and all that stuff, soda pop taxes, paper bag taxes, getting taxes when you get your nails done. None of that. No, we don't. That's not the way to go, Chicago. No more of this property tax nonsense, laying off the rich guys on us. No more TIFs. Implement the solutions in this book. And that's what we want our candidates to run on, I think.
Well, listen, I think that is a mantra. I want to have you to come. I have a organization, or it's not an organization, political action committee called 10 by 10 to Win. And what it is that we are establishing a independent black voting bloc. Because in Chicago, we have more than 600 registered black voters. In Cook County, or about 1.5 million. If we put a third of that together, we could elect, just like what you said. We can take, I know, at least 20 seats in the city council. We can get with 20, but I'm sure that there are some other white folks and Hispanic folks out there that are just as fed up that we can that.
No doubt.
We can elect 26 seats in the city council. I never thought about it in that context. So what I want to do is I want to have you to come to, and it's done by Zoom, but I want to have you to come to one of my Zoom meetings, maybe this Thursday, that you come to our Zoom meetings and we talk about this idea of what you just talked about. I love the idea of electing 26 aldermen. Now listen, audience, listen.
Yeah, right. Listen.
We can do this thing.
Listen.
We can do this thing. We take 26 seats because the people who are there now, most of those people are owned by the corporations.
Yeah, no, here's the thing. So here's what I would say to you and to any of our candidates. You take no money from a corporation or a union, only from human beings. Now, you may think that's a lot, but I feel like even a progressive union, it's a conflict of interest. Yes. So if you really want to tell the voters, I am unbossed and unbought, really the only way to do that is to swear to only take money from a human being. And if you get a check that has the name of a corporation on it or from a union, you politely return it. Now, you can say to the unions, you can endorse me. I'm not taking your money. But if you want to spend money, go register voters. That's how I would explain my stance to the teachers union or the plumbers union or wherever. And just say, don't give me your money. I'm not going to take it. No disrespect, but it's a conflict of interest. If I'm elected, I have to sit across the bargaining table from you, which of course we do. That's a conflict. It always has been. It's never not going to be a conflict. So the way I would resolve that is to simply say, you want to support civics in Chicago union, register the unregistered. Go into the black communities. Go into the working class communities. Register the unlikely voter. Register the young voters. That's a solid. That you're doing a service. It doesn't matter if they vote for me or not. And that's what I would say to any candidate who asks my advice. And then they could hold their head up high. Win or lose, they are unbossed and unbought.
I think that is it's simplistic in theory, It's simplistic in theory. I know that it won't be simplistic in terms of happening, but I certainly think it's something that is doable. I think it's something that we could certainly mobilize on to make this happen, because if we're able to get 26 people in the city council that we own, I'm using that term own, as voters, because if the voters empower whomever, meaning elect them, then if they want to be reelected, then they have got to govern to the voters.
You got to serve
right?
the people. You got to
You gotta
serve the people, and I got to deliver something. So is my
Right.
life better today than it was yesterday? Am I waiting as long for my train? Am I likely to get a better job? Do I have an after school program? Is the library open an extra hour? Yes or no? Don't give me fancy stuff about the loop and all that. I have nothing to do with that. I'm going to be the doorman. Maybe the black guy's going to open the door for you down at the the field building. No, put me to work. Make me smarter. Make my kids smarter, safer, happier, healthier. And I would say also, a challenge to the next mayor is to get all children who enter our public schools. 90% of them should graduate, not 60%. If the 90% of them graduate high school, that alone would turn the city inside out and upside down. And if they all read at or above grade level, that's my challenge. It has nothing to do with the loop, you know what I mean, or a dome stadium or another Starbucks. Get the children to read at or above grade level and have 90% of them graduate. The statistics say, Mark, that a person who graduates high school makes $500,000 more over his lifetime than if he has no high school degree. Right. That's a given. That's a $500,000. If they graduate college, it goes 3 times as high. So if we could just keep those kids in high school, the statistics say, and say only a quarter of them stay in Chicago, the other 3/4 move away from the city over their lives. That's $50 to $80 billion of new revenue, just right there. That simple fix, keeping kids in high school. Now, if I know that, and I'm nobody special, I'm no PhD in nothing. If I know that, then you got to know the mayor knows that. You got to know the big wigs downtown know that. It's just not where they choose to put their money. They want to put their money in the Bear Stadium or these 6 friggin' buildings. Screw those buildings. I don't blow them up. I don't care about them. But I do care about Dyett High School. I do care about Robeson High School. I do care about the library down on 110th Street. Do
we have the addresses of those 6 buildings?
We do. I have them.
What I'd like to do is I put out during the mayoral election, this past mayoral election, when Paul Wallace was running and the MAGA Republican billionaire donors undergirded his campaign, I put out some digital flyers with him and Sam Zales, Jennifer Pritzker, Ken Griffin, and I forget the other guy's name, but and Betsy DeVos.
Oh my God.
These were the people who undergirded his campaign, putting $14 million into his campaign. And of course it didn't work, but they haven't stopped and they're going to continue to do it because the Republicans, they want to infiltrate Chicago. They figured if they can infiltrate Chicago, they can turn the state red.
Oh, they would love to turn us around. They would love it.
So, but what I did is there is something called meritorious manumission. That was an act that was in 1710. Meritorious manumission was an act that allowed for slaves to earn their freedom if they tricked on other slaves or if they did something to protect the slave owner's property by telling on other slaves that were planning some type of revolt. Well, there were about 15 or 20 public officials, black public officials, that supported Paul Wallace, who's been rejected 3 times now by the voters because of his reckless policies that he inflicted on Chicago during, 800 black teachers lost their jobs. And of course, he didn't shut them down, but he certainly started the pathway of closing, 50 to 100 schools in our communities that we are paying $200,000 a year for empty buildings.
Yeah.
So I put this flyer out. That reminds people of who these people are.
Mm-hmm.
And now, when I first put it out, it didn't really get as much attention during the election. I just put it out about 2 weeks ago, and I got more than 30,000 views. So it got 30,000 plays. In fact, it garnered me a few phone calls from people asking me, what was I doing? And I just simply said, I'm reminding you of who, your so-called representatives are. Now, mind you, there were about 9 black aldermen, that supported Paul Wallace's campaign. Every one of their wards voted 80% for Brandon Johnson. What that tells me is that you have some representatives that are not representing their constituents. They're representing the interests of somebody else because they're completely disconnected from their constituents.
Yeah, that's some valuable intelligence right there. I mean, that's high vulnerability. I mean, that's just not only dissing your voters, but that's like working in the exact opposite of your voters' self-interest, perceived self-interest. So I would call those individuals very vulnerable in election next year, for sure.
Well,
here's another thing, though. As you're talking to your colleagues, we gotta recruit too. I mean, that's the other half of this equation. So
yes.
Keep your eyes peeled. This is a collective responsibility. Keep your eye peeled for community leaders, regardless of their background and pedigree, but they just have to be for the people. They have to, as Martin Luther King said, you don't have to have a PhD or make your participle or agree with your whatever you don't got to be like a wordsmith. You just have to have the heart of a servant. That's what he said. So that's the kind of person we're looking for, and just agree to be funded by human beings. Don't take money from corporations, and don't take money from unions. And if we have other pieces of advice, you can listen to us or not. But that's who we need. We need people from the people. Or as I often say, we are the leaders we've been waiting for.
Yeah. Well, I have a book that I just read by Eddie Glaude.
Yeah.
Eddie Glaude, who says, we are the leaders that we have been looking for.
I think I got that book. Mark, I think I can reach my hand and get that book too.
Yeah.
That's right.
So but that's where it is. It's come from the people, and that I'm just really glad that I connected with you. Like I said, I've been thinking about calling you for a few weeks, and we haven't talked in a long time. And I see why it is that we need to talk even more, because we obviously have the same thought pattern, but I think that you give some more intelligence and intel to share with people that I believe that we can motivate people to organize around this idea that the power is really in the hands of the people. And if we can get enough people together, if we got 200,000 people across the city together, we can elect 26 new aldermen easily.
Oh my goodness, because sadly the turnout, in this last election was below 30%, but if you include the voting age population,
yes,
it's 19%.
Right.
So the normal times people say, well, what was the turnout for the election? And people say, it was like 30%. Horrible, terrible, sad. that number says 70% stayed home, didn't care, no horse in the game. But it's actually worse than that, because there are a bunch of people who didn't even bother to get registered, who are 18 years old of older.
Right.
So, but I can understand why a person could say, well, this has nothing to do with me. It's so cynical. It's so far removed from my life. What's the point? I get that. A lot of people truly believe that, and it's very sad that it's come to that. But you know what? That plays into the hands of these mother effers, that they want us to stay home. They want us to be divided. They don't want black and white to talk. They don't want black and Jews to talk. They don't want Latinos and Muslims to talk. They would much rather have us all be dividing and conquering amongst ourselves.
Right.
And in some of these races, like you say, 400 votes. That's the difference.
Right. I contend if we had 10,000 people in each ward, if we had 10,000 people in each ward in this block, we turn the election upside down.
Oh, dude, it's more like if you had 2,500. If you could put your finger on 25 to 30,000 votes in at least half the wards, that's the game right there. But it's the thing is how to get people excited. That's the challenge.
Well, that's the challenge, and I think that what you and I have to do is to figure out the message that reaches people, right? That it touches their experience.
Yeah.
And I think that the real estate taxes is something that is a common concern and pain that people you can put a drawstring on it, and that you can get people to rally around if they understand it, because they don't have a Tom Tresser to help them to understand it, right? There's not enough Mark Wallaces out there to help them understand that people like Larry Rogers Jr. is not the friend that many people in the community has made him out to be. He's not the friend. George Cardenas is not the friend that people think that they are. And the Patrick Hines of the world is not our friends. But I believe that, as you say, I believe it has to come from the ground up. It has to come from the people, right? And if we can get enough people together.
And here's one more thing. Here's another thing I will throw into this pot of stew pot. So what's a provocative way to launch such a movement? I would do this: take the meters back. So imagine people in like red shirts saying, take the meters back, flooding the loop with clipboards, asking people to sign a petition to reclaim our parking meters from Morgan Stanley. I mean, they've already made, just to remind the listeners, the city got $1.1 billion in 2008 for a 75-year lease. All right, so that's 2008. They got like another 55 years to go. They already made all that money back.
Yeah, and for a system that was worth over $10 billion at the time that they sold it off.
So take the meters back. Can you imagine how fast people would be grabbing that pen out of your hand? And if they sign the petition, we want their email address, and we can say in a 1-minute pitch, this is part of a larger campaign. May we send you an email? Do you want to be part of this? We're going to take the city back. But first, we're going to take the meters back. And that's all you have time to say. I don't know about you, man, but I'm all ears. You know what I mean? Yeah. I want to know more. What do you got? What's next on your plate? What do you mean? And then, of course, you send that person an email saying, be part of campaign 27. Send us $27. Sign up, blah, blah, blah. You know, we take it from there. But I think I have never seen anything like that. I've told this to unions. I've told this to the Grassroots Collaborative. Anybody who gives me 2 minutes, I would share this idea. And I don't see why it hasn't happened. But
well, you know, probably hasn't happened because of, you know, in a lot of respects, some unions, they're also, you know, owned by corporations because they're working for hand in hand with some of the corporations. This has to come the same way that I believe in building the independent voting bloc. It has to come from the grassroots.
Well, the bottom up. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
It has. That's where it has to come from, and we have to figure out how to strike the match, and cause it to be a brush fire.
Well, somebody's got. I mean, you've got more stuff than I do, but I mean, let's start this conversation, and maybe part of the strategy is who else should be at this little table, at the beginning. But I mean, if you go back to the day, how did Harold Washington, relive that history? Some leaders went to a certain politician and said, Harold, and he said, no, you got to register me voters and you got to raise money. He put the stricture on them, but those leaders turned around and did the work. They hit the streets, rang the bells, picked up the phones, and Harold, I guess Harold was the message, that's right. What motivated people. But it was just like, we got to do it it ain't coming from the Democrat Party. It's not coming from the unions. It ain't coming from anywhere except the grassroots. So let's relive that chapter, perhaps, remind ourselves.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, Tom, I'm going to send you a link for Thursday's meeting. Our meeting starts at 6:30. I don't know. What do you have on your schedule Thursday?
Well, I'll be going to the theater at 7:30, so we'll see what I can do.
Okay. What time do you leave for the theater?
Probably 7:15.
Okay. So we start at 6:30. So if I can bring you on at 6:45 and you can give us a few minutes of talking about rehashing what you and I have been talking about tonight as a start. I think that this is going to get people really excited because, they have all been saying, we got to take action and people want to see action. Okay. Here are some concrete things that we could actually do to take action. All right.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. All right. Folks, Tom Tresser. All right. Tell them how to go to your website to get your book.
All right, you go to www.tresser.com. That's my last name, tresser.com. All the information is there. Sign up for my newsletter. It's called Civic Notes. I promise we won't spam you too much.
All right, fantastic, Tom. Thank you so much. I'll see you Thursday. We're going to talk soon.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
All right, folks. All right, listen, that's Tom Tresser, who is brilliant person. I've had a great time talking with him. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but he has given us a whole plethora of information that you and I can participate in and changing this entire system. But there is no room for despair. You cannot sit on the sidelines and just complain. You've got to get in the game if we want to change the way things that are done. There are all of these people who have these old stale ideas and continuing to just give more and more and more money to the wealthy who are already wealthy. And this central area plan must be reversed, must be rejected. $640 million. Let them go out and get their own $640 million, save their own buildings, or sell the buildings off, the banks, whoever they are, sell them off at a fire sale and let somebody redevelop the buildings to become a profitable source, just like they do other properties. If you can't afford it, then hey, that should not be on the taxpayers to subsidize some rich people from taking some loss. They got to take losses just like the rest of it. All right, that's going to do it for us this week on The People Show. I want to thank you all for tuning in to this Monday night's edition of The People Show. Hey, text 10X10 to the number 855-909-1385 so that you can get our text alerts coming up this Thursday. Tom Tresser is going to be with us. We're going to be putting this plan together so that we can elect 26 new aldermen. All right, we're going to be talking about that coming up this Monday night. I want to thank you all for tuning in to this Monday night's edition of The People Show. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, right here on intellectualradio.com and iHeartRadio.